So our last presentation is from Christian Gruendling, and Christian is technical director with the Association of the Austrian Chemical Industry as part of the Chamber of Commerce of Austria. Christian graduated in technical chemistry at the University in Vienna. I pass a bit of his CV because it's a bit long, but I could summarize saying that it held different positions in industry, the most recent being at DMS in the sector of fine chemicals. And since 2002, he is working at the association, the Austrian Chemical Industry Association, and his focus is on chemicals policy, REACH and CLP, safety and health at the workplace, and transports of dangerous goods. Christian has participating to a lot of conferences, training, events. I can testify that because I met him regularly. So, Christian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christelle. Thanks also from my side. I will look now from a little bit of a different angle on the REACH registration, namely from the downstream users side. What is important when we are talking about the REACH registration and the users of chemicals? Well, if I'm talking about downstream users, of course. Here we go. We have to take the definition into account. What is a downstream user? A downstream user means any natural or legal person established within the community other than the manufacturer or importer, because the manufacturer or the importer have direct registration duties, who use a substance either on its own or in a mixture in the course of his industrial or professional activities. And this is the definition. And then the definition continues that the consumer and the distributor are not regarded as downstream users. Well, if you look at different levels of downstream users, there are mainly two different types. The ones are the users of substances to formulate mixtures, the formulators. There can be several formulators in the supply chain. And then there are the industrial or professional end users of the substance. Well, the more you're on the formulator side as a downstream user, the more you should really be worried about the REACH 2018 deadline, because that means that in certain cases, some of the substances you need might not be registered. And what are you going to do then? But before I go to the REACH registration, I want to briefly mention that, of course, REACH defines quite a lot of obligations for downstream users. First of all, you have to identify the use. Well, which is your use registered or not? Then, if it's registered, and that is already current applications, you have to check the exposure scenarios you eventually receive and this is probably the most important one, apply the appropriate risk management measures. If you're a formulator, you have to recommend risk management measures for your mixtures coming from the substance. You have to compile the safety data sheets. Yeah? You have to think about how do I deal with all the exposure scenarios for different substances which are registered, to include that in the information I pass on for the mixtures. What is if I have a use which was not covered by the registration? What, in the worst case, was advised against in the registration? Do I have to do my own chemical safety assessment? Yeah, do I have to drive DNLs, PINEX, and so on and so forth? Do I have to inform ECHA on that? Yeah. Well, if I'm aware of new hazards when dealing with the substance, I have to inform the supplier about these new hazards. This is one of the obligations the downstream user has. Well, if I have to do something with articles, I have to check for substances of very high concerns in those articles. Maybe I have to communicate about those SVHC substances I put into the articles I produce as a downstream user. And of course, if it comes to, if it comes to authorization, I might be able to, even with a downstream user, need to apply for authorization if my supplier doesn't do that, or I have to report at least an authorized use to ECHA. But if I would now go into detail in all of these topics, you probably would starve from hunger, and well, the lunch break will be postponed until tomorrow. So I restrict it to the necessary. The main obligation of a downstream user is to use a substance as such, or in a mixture, or in production of an article safely. Now, coming back to the REACH 2018 deadline. We heard from Crystal already that registration is vital to ensure human health and environmental protection. From the industry point of view, for us it's vital to have the market. If we do not register, there is no market. And this is true for manufacturers, for importers, and, well, for non-EU importers via only representatives. If we look at the registrations, there might be some 10,000, 15,000 companies going to register, going to be affected by the real registration obligations under REACH. And the steps, we heard that in principle already. We will go into more detail about the registration this afternoon and tomorrow. But if we are talking about downstream users, it's if there are no data, if there is no registration, there is no use, because you do not get that substance anymore. And now we are not talking about 10,000 companies. We are talking about 26 million enterprises which can be regarded as downstream users. Public sectors and farmers are not included there. So if I would look at my role, I'm a downstream user of that ink in that ballpoint. Well, the ink probably will be there even after the REACH registration deadline, so I'm not too worried that I will not get a ballpoint pen anymore. But that's exactly the questions downstream users have to ask. Yeah? The formulators primarily, will the substances and all the substances which are vital for my business still be available after May 2018? Big question mark. If we look at the estimations, you said you estimate 25,000 substances which were pre-registered might be registered at that time. Are we sure that we are really going to have 25,000? My personal guess will be no. There will be way less, let's say 15, 18,000. What's with the remaining 10 to 7,000? Okay, and if you're a user of chemicals, you're not very much interested in the pure substance. You're more interested in the chemical performance of a cleaning agent, of, the ink. Can I still write? And that's more on the user side. Will the chemical performance I need still be there? Still be the same as before? Or do I have to adapt any other processes to other chemical performances of my mixture because some substances were not registered? In answering these steps, also downstream users, similar to what we heard, the 7 steps for the 6 to 7, keep your registration dossier up to date was the 7th. We have for the downstream users. First of all, we have to identify those substances which all companies need, which are critical to their business. Then they have to check if the substances are already registered, because then I can lean back a little bit. Then, we have to check if the substances are not registered, which substances should be registered still for me or from my supplier. If they are not registered yet, it would be a wise idea if there is a substance which I really need to continue my business, to contact the supplier and see his plans, whether he intends to register that substance, whether he says, well, I'm producing or importing until May 2018 and then I stop, or so on. So that's a good idea. Then, if he tells you, and that is a good case, yes, I'm going to register, make sure that your use is covered, because that makes life much easier as a downstream user. If he says, no, I'm not going to register, then it gets difficult. Look for an alternative supplier, if you find some. If you don't find some, consider whether you need to register, you need to import, and then be the registrant of that substance. And then, when you reach the 7th step, if everything went wrong, then you have to start with the first 7 steps Crystal and all the others showed before. Okay, let's go to the steps in detail, but before you do that, and Marco already mentioned that, also for downstream users, it's very important to have within the company clear responsibilities and dedicated resources to do all that. Because without any responsibilities, you will not be even able to make point 1, to identify the substances which are critical to the business. This is in principle exactly the same like for the registrant. You should do a REACH-compatible chemical inventory in your company. And of course, not do it once, not the one which you did maybe 2008 to check whether you need to pre-register something, but you need to keep it up to date. What kind of information should that include? Pure substances, which is purchased raw materials, auxiliary substances, but including not only chemical substances, also consider metals, minerals, natural substances, everything which in the broader sense, or if you look at the REACH definition, is a substance. Then, of course, well, we have around 100,000 substances in Europe, but the mixtures are the real challenge, because then we are talking 2 million and more. Which mixtures do I need? Paints, cleaning products, cosmetics, and so on. And include the chemical composition of the mixtures. And this is already a rather tricky part, because, I mean, for the hazardous chemical mixtures, it's easy. You get the safety data sheet, you look into section 3, find the hazardous components, and that's it. But no, for the REACH purpose, that's not it, because also the non-hazardous components need to be identified. Yeah? And, well, you might include produced or purchased articles, but these, for the registration purposes, are less relevant. That's more for the communication in the supply chain and the SVHC part. Okay, when you do that, you quickly find out, oops, did I do something wrong? Am I not already in a registrant role? Yeah? For example, if you find out that one of the paints you recently imported, well, luckily below 1 ton, but your business is growing and you might increase that import. So make sure that you are not already in a role where a registration duty might come to you. And then, if you find out, yes, you are really a downstream user for all the substances, all the mixtures, then you should prioritize the substance. Which substances or which mixtures, and then broken down to individual substances, are really important for my business? I mean, the pen is maybe important for my business, but not that important that I cannot substitute the ink there with another ink, and there will always be an ink there. But there might be some substances which are really critical for the business and unique for the business, and you need to identify that. And again, then for those substances, you identified which are critical for my business, which are important for my business, check the registration status. Are they already registered or not? Yeah? How can I check whether they are already registered? It's easy if we are talking about chemical substances or chemical mixtures which are hazardous, which do have a safety data sheet. Because then, for substances, you look into section 1, see the registration number, make a check, already registered. For mixtures, you look into section 3, for the hazardous components, they are listed with registration numbers or without. Yeah, those which do have a registration number, check, already registered. Well, it gets a little bit tricky for non-hazardous components in mixtures, for non-hazardous substances. When a safety data sheet is not available, then you could go and check on the ECHA website the list of lead registrant, whether for that substance already someone was identified as saying, yes, I'm going most likely to register that substance. Yeah? Or you check on the ECHA website the substances which are already registered. I have included the link in the presentation where you can click on it and then you can search by substance name or CES number for the substance, and then most likely you find out registration data, and in the registration data you even find out who registered that substance. Not necessarily, but most likely you find some names of the companies there. Yeah? Because that's included in the disseminated information unless claimed confidential. Okay, next step. Now we have all the substances critical for my business which are registered. Then there are some which are not registered, which need to be registered. Then I check, are exemptions applicable? Do I use that substance below 1 ton a year? Well, as a user, you cannot say whether the registrant doesn't still need to register, but it's easier if I use it less than 1 ton a year to find someone on the globe who manufactures exactly that substance, because then I do not really need to register that substance. Is the substance exempted from registration? Look into Annex 4 and 5 of REACH. Are the uses of the substance exempted for registrations? Uses like food or feeding stuff, medical products, human or veterinary use, and so on and so forth. Or are they regarded as being registered, active substance for biocide product or plant protection product, but then you start crying anyway because then you are in a different field of legislation which is even more complicated than what I'm talking about now. Be aware, waste is not regarded as substance mixture under REACH, and there are exemptions for recovered substances possible when it comes from the waste stream. The other thing we tend to forget, if we are talking about cosmetics and cosmetic ingredient, you also have to regard the registration. Okay, next thing. Now we found out Some substances are registered, some substances do not need to be registered because exemptions apply, so there are a few substances left which are critical for my business where a registration has not yet been done. I contact my supplier. It might not be easy in all of the cases because we always think about a very short supply chain. There's one producer of that substance or importer of that substance. Usually there are quite some distributors in between, but I have to find out who is the original registrant or contact, the distributor and hope that the distributor will pass on the information about my need to find out whether this substance is going to be registered or not. Because I need to check the plan of my supplier to still be able to supply me as a downstream user for that critical substance I need after May 2018. Yeah? And of course, if I try to contact them, I want a positive response about his intention to register. I mean, however, even if I get a positive response, I can never be 100% sure that he's really going to do that. Unless I'm a powerful downstream user and I have a contractual arrangement with him that, if he doesn't register, he has to pay me that and that amount. So, but just an intention to register is no guarantee that this still will be done. In any case, you can cross-check again with the response with the ECHA list of lead registrants, whether, there is some activity already ongoing for that substance which has not been registered yet. Okay, the good case, he said, yes, I'm going to register, then please make sure that your use is covered in that registration. How do you do that? You inform the registrant or the potential registrant about your use. Then this use gets an identified use and has to be taken into account in the registration. And only for health or safety to environmental concerns, he can advise against that use. If you're in one of those sectors I mentioned here, soap and detergents, cosmetic, construction products, adhesives and sealant industry, imaging and printing products, and there are more to come, then refer, when telling him about the use, to the sector use maps, because that is more or less the standardized communication about use in specific sectors of downstream users. Yeah? There might be the case that you don't want your supplier know what you're exactly using the substance for. Then please make sure that you yourself get acquainted with the requirements of downstream user chemical safety assessment and downstream user chemical safety report, because then it might very well be that your use will not cover it in the registration, and then you have to do the safety assessment for that use yourself. Next step. Okay, everything goes wrong. You contacted your supplier, and this is what we heard with the CIF already, 50% will not answer. I guess that ratio will be pretty much the same with the suppliers. They don't tell you that they are going to register, or they tell you, no, I'm not going to register. What can I do? I can look for alternative suppliers. It's easy for registered substances, because then there are already registrations there are already suppliers there. It's easy to find, I just have to switch the supplier. Again, you can check that on the ECHA website. For not registered substances, again, lead registrant list of ECHA, you might find someone there and some activity in that field. But if you don't find anything for that substance, please look for any other supplier It might be even outside of Europe. Yeah? Because you need to make sure that you still will get somehow that substance after May 2018, even at the cost of the next step that you are going to register yourself. Yeah? This is what I'm referring here. Okay, now, no response, but I was lucky enough to find a non-EU manufacturer for that substance. Yeah? What am I going to do then? Well, I contact him, and the first thing I would ask him is whether he is not intending to register via an only representative. He probably will say no, but if you do that, please be quick. Because if the outside non-EU manufacturer didn't consider to register yet, didn't appoint an OR, there is still a possibility for him to pre-register until May this year. But I'm coming back to that. If not, still, you can look, in that case now, for an alternative substance. Do I really need that substance? Or can I substitute that substance for my specific use with another one, which is similar, which is already registered or is going to be registered? But to be honest, if you start doing that now, it probably will be too late. So the next step, if that substance you're looking for, and you didn't get any positive response from any of your suppliers that he's going to register, yeah, you really should start preparing to become or immediately becoming an importer, yeah, with all the necessary steps afterwards concerning the registration. And bear in mind, if you import for the first time before May 31st, 2017, a late pre-registration is still possible. And also bear in mind that existing stock of pre-registered substances may be used beyond May 31st, 2018, which might help a little bit in the look for alternative substances beyond the May 2018 deadline, if you do not really want to register. Yeah? And please do not forget, if after May 31st, 2017, a registration needs to be done and no pre-registration has been made, that registration has to be done before you import that very specific substance the first time above 1 ton a year. Well, these more or less were the really relevant steps for downstream users in preparing for the deadline in about a little bit more than a year. But if you do that, please do not forget your current obligations while preparing for that. And this is use the substance safely. Get also acquainted with the activities under the CSR roadmap and the ANIS activities, especially when it comes to safe use of mixtures and how to communicate the exposure scenarios for mixtures. And be aware that with the registration of some other substances in May 2018, you will receive more exposure scenarios for the substances registered in the tonnage band between 10 and 100 tons a year, and that will increase the workload for yourself under REACH to prove that you use your substance safely. And with the reference to the very important and the main obligations of a downstream user, namely using the substance safely, I thank you for your attention. Thanks.